condition of the property at the time that the gift is made. Why? Because everything is kind of based on that, right? 10 years later, if someone is looking to see if the conservation easement terms are still being complied with or there's been a violation, they have to have some baseline to determine what has changed. And so there has to be a report produced at the time of the gift that lays out, here's what the property looked like, here are the features, here are the values, here's the soil types, all of that kind of stuff. And these can be quite thick too. And actually, I've told the land trust, they should make these into like coffee table books. You know, because this is your land, and this is a report about the land and all of its features, all of its conservation values. So that usually involves someone with some expertise that can look at the biology or the ecology and to document those things. Very often the land trust will do this. Sometimes we'll use independent contractors if the land trust is jammed up. But usually the land trust people are interested in preparing these reports, and there's a cost that's associated with that. That's part of the transaction costs that you as the landowner typically bear. We'll go over costs in just a minute.
Parks and Wildlife will do that?
Not to the level that I've seen.
Okay.
The tax code is somewhat ambiguous about this, but we haven't found anyone at Parks and Wildlife that does this particular kind of work. They'll do it like for you know, if you're doing wildlife management or something like that. Yeah, that's a little bit different. You might need a surveyor. It's not necessary that a new survey be produced, but very often when folks are doing this kind of work, if they have any questions or if anything comes up when they run the title to the property, sometimes a survey is required. All right? But typically in these transactions, I haven't seen a survey done unless I just got a new phone. Sorry. So sometimes a survey is required, sometimes the surveyor has to produce legal descriptions, although typically we just take them off the deed. If you're going to carve out little chunks of the property for future building envelopes, sometimes it's good to have a surveyor delineate those, mark them on the ground. Sometimes it's just necessary to use a GPS and kind of arrive at a description of those things. Usually there's maps and exhibits that are required in the easement document itself, but those can generally be produced pretty inexpensively. Sometimes to support the appraisal, a higher valuation on the appraisal, it's good to bring in a land planner. He'll do a plan of the development potential of the property and actually cost out what the entitlements would be if you wanted to create a subdivision. This doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does. That big project in Hayes County, we used a land planner to substantiate that 85% reduction in value. Okay? And that will support the appraisal if it's ever examined by the service. Always have your CPA or your financial planner as part of your team so that they understand what it is you're doing. If your CPA is filling out your tax return, there are some extra boxes to check and a couple extra forms to put in if you're going to take the deduction on your tax return. So typically very soon in the flow of the transaction, I'll have a conversation with the CPA right off the bat so he knows or she knows what's going on here.
Because in all likelihood, it'll be an education process for them too.
Yeah. And finally, your legal advisors, and typically you want to find someone who knows what the heck they're doing because these are unusual transactions. Not many attorneys are familiar with them. You just want to find someone that's reputable and is experienced. Next slide. Let's run through the costs quickly. I can't really give you, it's difficult to price these things because there's so many issues with land that come up when you're looking at the title and you're looking at protecting it. So the appraisal, boy, I've seen the costs of those things all over the map. The lowest conservation easement appraisal cost that I've ever seen is $4,000. Okay, the highest I've seen has been $70,000 on a massive project that we worked on. It took us many years. So again, tremendous range there. Baseline report, typically I've seen the cost there about $1,500 on up to $4,000. This big project we're working on now is probably going to be more than that, but that's unusual. Title research, a couple $100. If someone is paying you money for the easement, then they're going to require a policy of title insurance, just as if you sold the property to them. And that's a cost that the landowner typically bears, and that's set by statute, okay? So it really depends upon the value of the easement that is being sold. But in a donated transaction, the title research is just going to a title company and having them pull all the background documents on the property. That's a few $100. Surveys, again, prices could be all over the place. If you don't need a survey, then that wouldn't be required, and the exhibits, maps, and plans don't amount to much. If you have a land planner, that might be a separate cost. Mineral remoteness letter, let's talk about this. Okay, you want to put an easement on your 300-acre ranch, but sometime in the chain of title, the mineral rights have been severed. You don't own the mineral rights. Somebody else owns them. You can't put an easement on your ranch and tell the mineral owner, sorry, you can't come on my property anymore to develop these minerals. If they've got the right, they have the right of access, okay? So whenever in the chain of title the minerals have been severed, there's a question mark about your ability to protect the conservation values. And typically what we're looking for here is a prohibition against surface mining. All of the easements to qualify under the tax code have to prohibit surface mining. Now you can still come in and explore for gas or oil or drill for gas or oil. That's allowed under the tax code. Limited localized disturbance is permitted. But if your mineral rights have been severed, what the tax code says is, well look, we can't give you this donation because if your mineral rights have been severed and someone's going to come in and strip mine this property 3 years later, which they have the right to do, that's a problem for us. We don't like giving you thousands of dollars in tax savings if that's the case. So what you have to do is get a geologist, someone who's qualified, to issue a letter. They research the minerals that are possible on the property, and if they come to the conclusion, and most times this happens, that the commercial exploitation, extraction of minerals on the property is so remote as to be negligible, then your conservation easement donation qualifies under the tax code and you get the tax benefits. So this is one of those little things that for the unaware attorney or the unaware landowner who runs through this transaction, don't realize that the minerals have been severed or don't think that there's anything else they need to do, you can run afoul. If the transaction is audited and the IRS looks at the chain of title and they say, oh, the mineral rights have been severed, where's your remoteness letter? Boom, they'll kick that donation.
Has carbon sequestering been?
No, but that's gonna be coming up.
Be one.
That's gonna be something interesting in the future. So that's something to pay attention to. Environmental hazards, typically this is not an issue. Most of the rural ranch has the typical kinds of, chemicals and pesticides associated with rural ranch use. We're talking about, buried gasoline tanks, that sort of thing. The land trust, if they're going to take an interest in the property, can be your partner. They don't want to expose themselves to any liability for that. So most land trusts will send someone out to take a look at the property, or they'll look at it with their own staff resources and they'll say, it's okay. There's no big biohazards here, okay? No, atomic waste dumps on the property or something like that. And that, usually they do that in-house, doesn't amount to much in terms of cost. Closing and recording costs, usually the attorney closes these things, not the title company. The document is filed at the county courthouse, it's a few $100 to record depending on how big it is. The Stewardship Endowment, and I think Brent has already mentioned this is usually a separate cash gift that you're making to the land trust. So you might reimburse the land trust for the cost of the baseline. That's a hard cost, a transaction cost that you have to pay up front. This Stewardship Endowment is a cash gift that you're making, which helps the land trust in its monitoring and enforcement work over time. So they'll invest those funds and they'll use the income off those funds to meet their monitoring costs, for example. And a certain portion they might invest for enforcement purposes if that was ever required. So that gift is separate. It's a separate part of this transaction. It is a gift, okay? So that's something that you look at, you talk to the land trust, you'll understand what they're doing. They might present a budget to you to help you understand, justify a certain size of gift, but it's a gift that you're making. So that's something you have to deal with the land trust